We're so excited to be presenting on this topic. It's one that's very close to my heart, and Katie's as well. And so let's just jump right in. So today our discussion is going to focus around this brief roadmap. We're going to discuss a little bit about what dysfunctional family dynamics are, what they look like, their characteristics, family roles that we can begin to fall into when we come from or experience dysfunctional family dynamics. We're going to talk about navigating these dynamics during the holiday season in particular, and some suggestions for boundaries, self-care, and coping skills. We're going to end with a few resources, and then we'll jump into a Q&A. So I will pass it to Katie for our next slide.
Hey, everyone. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for coming. Before we start out, we just want to start talking about the family system. And just want to highlight that a family is defined by a group of one or more parents and their children that live together in a unit. So when we think about family, we often think of the nuclear family, which is the mom and dad and kids. But as we're going through these slides, we just want to keep in mind that all families look different. Maybe you had step parents, biological parents, step siblings. And then we'll also be referring to those folks that provided direct care to you as your caregivers. So those were the folks that were your mom, dad, stepmom, stepdad, grandparents. Maybe you were adopted. Maybe you were raised in a single parent home by just a mom or dad. Maybe you had two moms, two dads. So we just want to keep in mind just all of the different ways that a family and caregivers can look for people. And then also just paying attention to the fact that all families fall in this continuum of functional and dysfunctional. And what that really means is that your caregivers possess the skills to provide you with what you needed physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually. And then when it can turn into dysfunction, that's when they are lacking those skills. And so that's when we begin to see harmful behaviors or situations within the family system.
Great. Thank you, Katie. And yeah, so what are dysfunctional family dynamics? What is a dysfunctional family? And so if we look to the McGraw-Hill Concise Dictionary of Modern Medicine, they define a dysfunctional family as a family with multiple internal conflicts, including sibling rivalries, parent-child conflicts, domestic violence, mental illness, etc., or multiple external conflicts, so substance abuse, extramarital affairs, gambling, unemployment, etc. And these multiple influences affect the basic needs of the family unit. So it's important to take note that these dynamics are about the multiple negative influences that affect basic needs. That's what separates families experiencing minor dysfunction from those where family dysfunction is a really serious problem that could warrant treatment. So every individual's family and experience with dysfunctional family dynamics is very unique, and there's a huge amount of variability when it comes to influences, experiences of, and drivers of family dysfunction. So on the side we just want to highlight some common themes and dynamics that come up often in this work. First, we have chemical dependence, addictions, and mental illness. This could be one or both caregivers or other family members who have addictions or compulsions, including but not limited to drugs, alcohol, promiscuity, gambling, overworking, et cetera, or untreated mental health concerns like depression, anxiety, personality disorders, et cetera, that have strong influences on family members and a family's ability to meet the basic needs. We also have conflict-driven families. In these families, arguments, criticisms, and verbal assaults are very regular occurrences. Caregivers may view their family members as possessions rather than people with their own wants and needs. We also have violence-driven families. In these families, one or both caregivers may use the threat or the use of physical or sexual violence as a primary means of control. And or children may be forced to bear witness to violence between family members, or even be forced to participate in the punishment of other siblings or family members in hopes of protecting themselves. Alongside this, we have authoritarian families. These families prioritize obedience, discipline, and control, specifically in regards to their ideology, often falling within a specific religious, political, financial, or personal belief system. In these families, there's often a punishment of autonomy, And children are often expected to absolutely adhere to all rules with no room for discussion or debate. And finally, we have emotionally unavailable, emotionally detached, or neglectful families. In these families, one or both caregivers are unable to provide or threaten to withdraw financial support, adequate emotional support, or basic physical care for their children. And because of this, children's basic needs remain unmet. So these include experiences of physical neglect, emotional neglect, and abandonment, among others. While this is just a short list of some of the dynamics, and it can be very intense, there are a wide variety of dynamics that can impact a family's functioning and ability to meet basic needs. So if your struggles or your experience isn't represented on this slide or in subsequent slides, please know that your struggles are still valid and still very real. And there are likely many, many folks who are also struggling with similar dynamics as you.
Thank you, Kate. That was great. So now we're going to get a little bit more granular after looking at these different types of dynamics. And I'm going to go through some traits, but also keep in mind that maybe you experienced something that was outside of what we're going to list, and we'd love to hear about your experiences at the end, or feel free to pop that in the chat. So first, common traits of caregivers could have been poor communication skills. For example, this could be the mom that goes in her room and shuts the door and disappears. She doesn't want to talk about things. She avoids conflict, or the silent treatment, avoiding just those hard conversations. Next, we have your caregivers lacking the ability to regulate their own emotions and self-soothe. So this could be a caregiver with depression that slept in bed all day. This could also be a caregiver with maybe borderline personality disorder, the highs and the lows, maybe threats of, I don't want to live here anymore, threats of suicide. Next, fear and anxiety-based decision-making. So these caregivers are incredibly protective, authoritarian, paranoid, anxious of the outside world. Kind of Kadence went over that dynamic earlier. So they can be really irritated with different points of views. This can come up with folks that have parents that maybe are anti-vaxxers, QAnon, strong views on Black Lives Matter, just any hot topics with very black and white views around those dynamics. Next, conditional or withholding of love. So when we think about that, did your caregiver show affection to you? Did they hug you? Did they kiss you? Do you remember feeling touched by them, comforting you when you were sad? And then also, did they show favoritism? Did you feel like maybe they showed more care to your brother than you or your sister than you? And maybe the conditional love was only showing you love when you did something they wanted, when you were following all the rules. Next, we have the setting of unattainable expectations. So I think about a narcissistic parent, somebody that wants you to reflect them in sports. You're the all-star player. You always got to score the goals. Academia, you have to get the best grades, or maybe relationships. So you have to have the perfect family and the perfect children, and that's a reflection of them. Next, emotionally unavailable. So these caregivers can have a really hard time talking about anything that is beyond surface level. They don't know what to do when you bring up feelings. They don't know what to do when you have a broken heart or you're struggling in dating relationships, or if you just have your own mental illness, anxiety, depression, or eating disorder. And then lastly, unpredictable or sometimes violent moods. So these caregivers are very dominated by strong feelings and become very reactive to small things. Some things can be the end of the world, even though it's such a small, minor thing. And they can also pull back and forth between seeing people as either saviors or abandoners. And that can also bleed into how they interact with you as the child.
Thank you, Katie. And it's important to note that these traits of the caregivers set the tone almost for the dysfunctional family dynamics that can come to be when these traits are present. And this family dysfunction, these dynamics can be experienced in a wide variety of ways. But again, some common characteristics of the family systems who experience dysfunction include excessive control, particularly over children, a lack of privacy, a lack of independence, poor communication within the family, perfectionism, feelings of inadequacy, conflict, neglect, a lack of empathy, excessive criticism, excessive use of anger, derision, guilt, or demeaning as tools for control within the family system. the building of mistrust and resentment among family members, a distinct lack of emotional support, the presence of violence and abuse, and the denial of dysfunctional family dynamics, in which caregivers refuse to acknowledge abusive or dysfunctional behavior, or even possibly believing their behavior to be normal or even beneficial. So the environment that's created by these dysfunctional family dynamics often sets up a system in which family members begin to ascribe to a certain set of family roles in order to keep the family equilibrium, the balance. And so some of these roles that folks can take on, whether they're the children within the family dynamics or even some of the caregivers, we'll begin with the scapegoat. This can be also known as the troublemaker or even the truth teller. And often the scapegoat is conflated with the role of quote unquote problem child. Those of us who fall into this trope are often cast aside and blamed for family problems. And this leaves us feeling rejected, unlovable, isolated. And those of us who fall into this role as the scapegoat are often very aware of our role, and may have experienced being pitted against siblings who fall into the hero or golden child trope. And in adulthood, we may experience difficulty genuinely connecting with other people, and we may experience some forms of self-sabotage and difficulty with self-esteem. We also have the caretaker. This is the protector, the enabler, at times the codependent. This is an individual within the family that attempts to keep everyone safe within the family, or keep everyone within the family happy, even if that means denying real issues that are affecting the family. So it's kind of like a hear no evil, see no evil, speak no evil. Both children and adults can play this role or fall into this trope. And this trope is one that's based around enabling. It can be codependent, and it prevents the family from moving forward. So those of us who fall into this trope often feel like we're acting out of anxiety, fears that the family will fall apart and that we'll be left unsafe, alone, unloved, or rejected. And that's why we take on this role. We also have the mascot. This is the family clown, the jokester. It's a member of the family who experiences pressure to step in when situations are tense or volatile and use humor or goofiness to diffuse or distract from really serious issues. This can become a really self-reinforcing cycle as with each successfully diffused situation. It reinforces the pressure to continue to distract the family from their issues. So often the mascot is acting from a place of anxiety and may experience bouts of depression. And in adulthood may feel drawn to more intense or dysfunctional relationships where they can step into their role to diffuse conflict. We also have the hero, the golden child, the super kid. Often they're high functioning and seemingly well balanced. And they're the family member that the other members of the family points to as an example that backs up the family illusion of doing well or succeeding. Often the hero can feel some pressure to carry the family's appearances of success and achievement, and in adulthood, they might find themselves unconsciously drawn to emotionally unavailable partners or have more problems experiencing intimacy, deep intimacy. And finally, on this slide, we have the lost child, the invisible child. This is a child who attempts to make oneself invisible as much as possible, almost in an attempt to blend into the background in order to protect themselves or avoid rocking the family boat. So those of us who fall into this trope may feel ignored, neglected, scared to draw attention to ourselves. We may experience some difficulty developing social skills, self-esteem, and healthy relationships. And being alone may feel tied to emotional and physical safety.
Thank you, Kate. So next, we're going to go into effects into adulthood. So as we've been talking about all of these different characteristics and the roles that you might have taken on, we're going to talk about how these could affect you into adulthood. But keep in mind that you may not relate to these, maybe some of these. And again, we want to hear at the end what you may identify that wasn't mentioned. So first, we have development of mental health concerns. So when you are around caregivers that had dysfunctional behaviors, you might find yourself struggling with anxiety or depression as an adult. Next, difficulty expressing emotions. So if you grew up having to suppress or ignore or hide how you felt as a child when there was a lot of chaos and dysfunctional dynamics, You might have difficulty expressing big feelings as an adult. And then you might experience just overall unease, guilt, inadequacy, anger. And then next, you might experience social isolation or loneliness. So you may feel disconnected and lonely and long for that connection that you didn't receive as a child, but you also feel really scared to depend on others because that attachment, that dependence wasn't met as a child. Next, you may experience low self-esteem. So this can result in being our own worst critic, feelings of self-hatred, self-rejection, and then high-risk behaviors and addiction. So some of us watched our caregivers turn to unhealthy ways of coping. So maybe alcohol or food. And then we might take on some of these same patterns as an adult. Development of parenting problems. So this really speaks to intergenerational trauma. So if you're exposed to abuse, parental incarceration, divorce, substance abuse, poverty, natural disasters, those experiences really profoundly affect future generations and the way that folks parent as adults. Next, people-pleasing behaviors. So with people-pleasing, we say yes when we really want to say no, and then we have a really hard time setting boundaries. And then lastly, difficulty forming healthy adult relationships. So again, if you didn't grow up with parents that you were able to attach to in a healthy way, you may struggle with love and dating as an adult. And then what comes up for you is a lot of triggers of anxiety, fear, abandonment. And so you cope with this by being avoidant of relationships or overly ruminative and anxious, when deep down you are craving a stable and secure partner.
And of course, we're social workers, so we're always going to want to take a strengths-based approach, and we really adhere to that. And the truth is, even though the effects of dysfunctional family systems can be so pervasive and long-reaching, there are plenty of things within your own power and control to change as you see fit. Some of the ways that we can overcome the effects of dysfunctional dynamics include taking responsibility for ourselves. And this really means being gentle with ourselves, giving ourselves grace while challenging ourselves to work toward healthy emotional lives. And this includes acknowledging, understanding, and internalizing that you're not responsible for the thoughts, words, actions, or behaviors of anybody else. All that's in your control is your own thoughts, words, actions, and behaviors, your own life and your own livelihood. We can also do this by learning and practicing skills we weren't taught. So skills like communication skills, independence, empathetic listening, handling problems directly, self-confidence and self-acceptance, and again, that self-compassion. We can get creative. We can find new ways of expressing ourselves and developing our own self-narratives. In whatever way that means for you. Maybe you like to knit and you knit the story of your life and it means something specifically to you, or you journal, or you paint, or whatever you like to do, or whatever helps you creatively express some of the experiences that you've been through and that may still be unprocessed, is always a wonderful thing. And finally, we always recommend that folks seek help, that we get into professional spaces where a professional can offer a safe environment to process experiences in childhood and adolescence and examine and help you make those links to what's happening in your adulthood. So we'll be talking a little bit more about the other ways to overcome the effects of dysfunctional dynamics and in specific relation to the holiday season in the following slides. So I'd just like to begin this one with a quote from Diane Dreyer, who writes that no matter how far you've come or how much you've evolved, people often fall back into old family roles during the holidays, which can lead to conflict. So even though some of us adore the holidays and some of us hate it with a passion, the fact remains the holidays often act as a means of gathering many family members together at once. And some caregivers who've enacted dysfunctional or abusive dynamics may use the holidays as a means of gaining control, seeking attention for themselves, or manipulating others. Further, these larger cultural expectations around the holidays themselves, particularly in the age of Instagram and other social media, often gives us the message that the holidays should be Instagram level happy. And this tension between perhaps not feeling so happy inside and being forced to put on a happy face, or worse, deal with stimuli that might be triggering for us, can cause us immense emotional turmoil during this time of year. So when we're faced with these kind of triggering situations and behaviors, it can feel much easier to fall back into old dysfunctional patterns or family roles in order to cope. These are the patterns in which of who they knew us to be. And we do this rather than disrupt the equilibrium of the family system as it stands. So this is why many of us do find ourselves regressing, quote unquote, or enacting some of those old roles when we're in contact with dysfunctional family during the holidays. And it's why it's particularly important to be very gentle with yourself during this time and practice self-compassion.
Yeah, I'm going to take the last three, just continuing to highlight different dynamics that may come up during the holidays. So this one is family denial of dysfunction. So being around your family dysfunctional dynamics means that you have to pretend like everything is normal because your family members are in denial of their own dysfunction. And if you do try to address it, the things that bother you, can become angry, defensive, and it can create conflict. Next is exposure to unhealthy patterns. So it can be really challenging to be around family members that have alcoholism, eating disorders, because this might trigger your own recovery from those patterns. And then also keep in mind, as we become more self-aware through whether you're in therapy or just working on, understanding your family dynamics, we will begin to recognize new dysfunctional patterns that we didn't see in the past. So remember that as you're going home, you might have new triggers, see things in a new light that you didn't see before. For instance, maybe the jokes that your father makes that are very sadistic towards you or other siblings, or your mother who makes really fat phobic comments that you didn't realize were that way before and affect your own view of your body. And then lastly, feeling invisible, like your family doesn't know you. This can be really, really hard because you feel like your family is supposed to be, your tribe, the people that know you the best, but they don't know about your dating life, your love life, your values, your dreams, your hopes, your fears. They don't know how you're doing in school. They don't know about your job or about the bad breakup that you just went through. So this can be really challenging to feel invisible when you're in the spaces around your family during the holidays.
Fantastic. So for those of us who will be returning home for the holidays, we do have a short list of tips and recommendations for you to consider. And we'd like to begin with this first one: know your boundaries and enforce them. That is perhaps the most important point that we can begin with. And it's important to note that these boundaries that we're talking about, they exist on a spectrum and they're deeply personal. So what works for you may not work for me, and vice versa. This means that it's important to take the time to know your limits, and to develop plans to honor and enforce them. Alongside this point of boundaries, ask yourself if you really have to or want to go in the first place. Emotions like shame, guilt, or obligation can play a major role in convincing us that we need to stay in touch with family members who have caused us harm. And sometimes listening to the emotions and staying in touch to avoid the guilt is the right choice for us. For others, the emotional cost of the harm experience when visiting home outweigh any benefits. Neither is right or wrong. You're the only person that can make that decision for yourself. So spend some time thinking through where your values lie and what is the safest and healthiest options for you. We also invite you to temper your expectations. And for this, we lean on the quote by Martin Beck on the side. The hope that our families will act perfectly or even reasonably well sets us up to be incapacitated by the dysfunction that we'll almost certainly encounter. So have realistic expectations of others, and keep in mind that generally it's much better to be pleasantly surprised that it's gone well than extremely disappointed or even incapacitated, in the words of Martha Beck, that it didn't meet your expectations. We also invite you to consider inviting a friend or having some friends on call. So some dysfunctional families will put on their best behaviors in front of others. If that is yours, then maybe bringing a friend along for the ride might be a great idea. However, if nobody can be with you or you're not comfortable with that, knowing who might be available for a text or a call for that extra support is a good idea, and letting that other friend know, hey, I really might need to call you. Another big suggestion would be having a backup plan and having an exit strategy. So if you know that one of your family members is going to likely say or do things that are triggering, prepare ahead of time. You can do this by thinking ahead, thinking about what's the worst case scenarios, what are my triggers, how would I ideally want to react to them, and role playing with someone that you trust. or knowing what you do to change the subject. So plan ahead about the minimum and maximum amount of time that you'll devote to the gathering. Plan about what to do if someone says something insulting. Will you step outside for fresh air? Will you excuse yourself to another room? We really invite you to take a mental inventory of past holiday situations that made you unhappy or uncomfortable, and figure out how you would ideally like to react, or even to not react. And this allows you to better deflect and shut down some potentially painful interactions. Talking it out, once again, is a great idea, whether it's with a trusted friend, partner, your therapist, a private journal, etc. Get those big thoughts, those big feelings, these triggers out, and put them somewhere else that's not just sitting inside of your body. Obviously, we'd like everyone to increase self-care around this time of year, and consider minimizing idle time with family by bringing a game, or having a few conversation topics that you know will be safe to keep in your back pocket. Change up the logistics if you're able. For example, if you normally stay with your family, but it gets crazy around the holidays, maybe if you're able, staying at a hotel or another friend's house, another family member's house, a safe family member's house. Make some excuses that you have to get work done, whatever you need to have more autonomy and control about the amount of time that you spend with others. And our final suggestion on here is protect the kids. If you're worried about toxic communication from relatives happening in front of your children, the best way to handle this is allowing your children to see you standing up for yourself and setting healthy boundaries. And after, try explaining to your child why you became reactive and why you set those boundaries.
Great. So we have been talking about those who are going home for the holidays and are preparing for being around those dysfunctional family dynamics. But we also want to hold space for those of you who have decided to go no contact. So that means you said enough is enough. I'm going to do me. I'm not going to go home. I'm going to protect my space. And that really is that boundary setting, doing what you feel like is best for you. So just some recommendations in that area for those of you. We just recommend holding on to your sense of self. So it's a huge decision to go no contact, to prioritize yourself this holiday season. So knowing that you've made the best decision that you could for yourself may help temper any feelings of guilt. And then speaking of guilt, we do recommend to let the guilt go. Question how and if your sense of guilt is serving you. And if it's not, try to release it. Try to really get in touch with what's going on with you and what that guilt's doing, what that guilt's saying to you. And then also know that that guilt can make you more vulnerable to being receptive of abusive dynamics in the future. Next, build your own tradition. So I love this one. You can throw a killer friends holiday party. You can rent a cute little Airbnb upstate with a hot tub if you're on the New York side. Maybe find a favorite movie to watch and order your favorite takeout food. So this is all about you and your self-care and comfort, and creating a new tradition that's meaningful and comforting for you. Leaning on your community. So it's always great to have a friend, a partner, a spouse to lean on. So that could mean going to their not so dysfunctional family dinner if that feels safe to you. But also, if you prefer to avoid the holidays, knowing who you can call and text and who you can lean on during that time is really important, because you might get a little bit lonely. And then lastly, giving to your community. This is also really important. A lot of people are struggling during the holidays. We have resources physically, financially, emotionally. So you can really connect with other folks by giving back, whether it's taking a shift at a food bank or financially donating, crisis line volunteering. Just Google what's going on in your state, whether you're here or in California or wherever you're listening from. And then next, you really want to dive into self-care and coping skills. So this is probably one of the most important things to go over and really gear us up and get us ready to go into these dysfunctional dynamics. Self-care will definitely look different. You're going to be in a new environment. You're not going to have your normal routine. You might be staying in your teenage room that you grew up in as a kid. So we really encourage you to prepare for that. That could look like finding a yoga studio in your hometown and getting a class pass, maybe FaceTiming a friend, planning, a girls' night on FaceTime with wine or something, taking a walk outside. And then next, we really want to highlight some coping skills that we love that we have listed here. So the first is box breathing. And with this, you can really envision a box. With this, you inhale to the count of 4, filling your lungs up. And then what you do is you pause for a count of 4 as you hold your breath. And then you slowly exhale for 4 seconds. And then you pause and hold your breath for 4 seconds. And you do this around this box that you're envisioning. And if 4 seconds feels too long, you can do 3 seconds. You can do 2 seconds. So really any kind of meditative breathing. Next, we love anchoring phrases. So these can be words or sentences that really anchor you in reality. For me, I could just say, my name is Katy. My age is X. I live in this city, this state. I'm going home tomorrow. My flight is on United Airlines. Really stating the facts to ground you in reality. Another grounding exercise is to engage your 5 senses. So 5 things you see around you, 4 things you can touch around you, 3 things you hear, 2 things you can smell, maybe that pumpkin pie or turkey, and then 1 thing you can taste. So that's another grounding exercise you can do. And you can even pop that in your phone. You can Google that too, grounding exercises, and add those to a note in your phone. Next, I love self-compassion and mantras. These are probably my favorite coping skills. They're my go-to. They really help combat shame and that narrative that's negative. And especially when we're going back into our old roles and you feel like your childhood self again. And why am I this old person? I've done all this work. I've done therapy. I shouldn't be acting like this. But we really want to encourage you to have self-compassion. So you could say, I'm having a rough time, but I will make it through. I'm trying hard and I'm doing my best. I have survived 100% of the bad days so far that I've been here on this vacation. And some mantras. I have what I need to get through this. I can handle feeling uncomfortable. Who I am is not up for compromise. I love that one. Next, becoming a participant observer. So this was developed by social scientists that did research and would just watch groups of people. And so maybe you're at the dinner table with family and you're starting to spiral and feel overwhelmed, but you can pretend to kind of step back and watch everything like it's a movie. So this takes you out of the swept up experience of emotions. And I had a friend once say she made humor out of it. And she said, what if I just pictured everybody in their underwear at the dinner table? And she started laughing. So it's really just trying to get you out of that spiral of anxiety and switch your emotions, distract yourself. And then lastly, creating a coping card. I don't think anybody carries around the little 4x4 cards in their pocket anymore. We have our iPhones, so you can go onto your notes and your iPhone and you can do list 1 through 5. Just some suggestions. 1 could be take 5 slow breaths. 2 could be smell something, engaging your senses. 3 could be send a text to fill in the blank, your go-to person. 4 and 5 could be mantras. It's okay to feel sad. This discomfort is temporary. And then 6, gratitude is so helpful. So even if you're feeling guilty for maybe not feeling grateful for your family because it's really hard to be around them, there's something that you can find to be grateful for that can shift your mindset.
Fantastic. And so just on this final slide, we have some resources that we'd recommend you check out. These are some books about dysfunctional family dynamics, some social media accounts that'll be talking about dysfunctional family dynamics or how to navigate and cope with stress during the winter holidays. And as we begin to close out this section of the presentation, we want to make mention that dysfunctional family dynamics can really wreak havoc in the lives of the adults who've navigated them. However, these experiences with familial dysfunction can also catalyze really key and unique strengths like increased capacities for empathy, heightened emotional intelligence, maturity, competency, and of course, immense resilience. And so we do want to make mention that for those who've struggled to navigate familial dysfunction in their adult lives, we at A Good Place Therapy are here to offer support, whether it's individually or in group therapy modalities. And starting in January of 2022, Katy and I will be facilitating the ACEs group. And this is a therapy group that's intended to provide support, coping skills, psychoeducation, share experiences, and build hope for the adults who have experienced challenges like parental substance abuse, untreated parental mental health concerns, and other forms of family dysfunction during their childhood. So if you're interested in this group or want to learn more about it, you can contact Katy or I at our first name, Katy or Kadence at agoodplacetherapy.com. And I believe now we will move into our question section.
Thank you, Katy and Kadence. What a wonderful presentation. And those tips and recommendations are incredible. I will be using some myself. So we did have actually, if anyone has questions that they want to submit, please feel free to put it in the chat. But we did get quite a few in advance of the presentation that I wanted to bring up. So the first one we got was, what are some quick skills for interrupting the dysfunction? You guys kind of went through that a little bit, but maybe there's some more that you want to speak to.
Yeah, I can take this one if you like, Katy.
Sure.
So just some skills. Again, well, I'll just reiterate briefly, being proactive. So think about some of the tips that we mentioned earlier, like bringing a game so that the topics around the dinner table aren't too crazy, or having a backup plan, having those conversation topics that you know are safe in your back pocket. Another thing that you can do in regards to being proactive is know the warning signs. So if you know that there's a certain topic that'll lead to an eruption, know how to catch the dynamics that are happening early and make use of distracting interventions, or use your backup responses. And some of these distracting interventions could be games, less triggering topics. It can be things that you just keep in your back pocket to intervene during the early moments. Definitely recommend you keep your cool as best you're able, trying to engage mindfully and intentionally. Keep in mind, and if necessary, practice those coping and emotional self-regulation skills and communicate your needs. And definitely the biggest thing that we can say is, like, know your limits. Even though we might have this drive or desire to interrupt or control or diffuse a dysfunctional moment that's happening within a family setting, it's really important to remember and keep in mind that you're the only one. You are only in charge of your own thoughts, feelings, emotions, behaviors. You're not in control of or responsible for anybody else's. So it can be helpful to use these techniques like distraction, canned responses, changing topics, but ultimately take care of yourself.
Yeah, I can't agree more. I think we need to remember that we can't change our family members and their dysfunctional behaviors or patterns or things they say. And so a lot of it is acceptance, and that can also bring grief. But I think just some quick things that you could also do just to add to Kadence is having like a quick phrase that you say. I know this has helped me. You could say, and I statements, using I statements. I can't stress that enough, because if we use the I statements, they're non-confrontational. So you could say, I don't love to talk about that, but I'd love to hear more about, your job, what's in this pumpkin pie, just whatever you can do to change the subject. Or I'm not interested in sharing about that anymore, but I appreciate you asking what's going on with tennis club. I don't know who does that, but basically just changing the subject, or saying, I'm going to go take a walk outside now. I need to use the restroom. Pretend you get a phone call. Whatever you need to do to kind of like interrupt the dysfunction. It can be immediate by just that quick phrase, or just taking a step outside.
Yeah, those are really good tips. We got another question that's very specific, but I'm going to share. How do we navigate through the guilt of moving out or living on your own when your mom is single and would feel alone in life or the home you live in? So I'll just reiterate one more time. How do I navigate through the guilt of moving out or living on my own when my mom is single and feels alone in life and the home? And then this person wrote, my mom doesn't go out much. She just drives back and from to work. She's a big homebody. So I think this person is just a little bit worried about their mom and how this person could go about not feeling so guilty.
Yeah, definitely. Katie, do you mind if I jump in?
No, go for it.
Fantastic. So first, like, this situation is really difficult, and it's one that a lot of folks who struggled with dysfunctional family dynamics often face, the feeling of, oh, am I abandoning my parent? Um, so even when dynamics within a family are dysfunctional, we as humans, we're hardwired to have an emotional connection or a bond with our parents or caregivers. Um, and when we've experienced these dysfunctional family dynamics, particularly in childhood, and we may begin to fall into the dysfunctional family roles that we previously discussed, or we may learn and internalize that we're somehow responsible for the lives and emotions of our caregivers. And I will say a question that my brother posed to me once that really changed my outlook was simply, is your life your own? So understanding and internalizing like new messages that we're only responsible for and in control of our own lives. And using things like mantras, like Katie's mentioned multiple times. One of my favorites is, I'm strong enough to make the decisions that are in my highest good, even when it is difficult. I have a responsibility to myself to do so. With that being said, it doesn't mean you just throw your family to the wind and say, oh, forget mom, like I'm, no, you can still offer positive, healthy, and adaptive emotional support to family members. You can do that by encouraging them to seek help, or find new things that, or encouraging them to find new things that they're interested in, or having a set day that you have a quality time activity together, whether it's in person, on Zoom, FaceTime, whatever. Those are adaptive ways that you can help support someone without taking the responsibility of their life or their situation. And I'd also just like to say that guilt is such a heavy emotion. And I'd invite you to consider, who is the guilt serving? Is it serving you, or is it serving someone else? How is it helping you? How is it hindering you? And how is it helping or hindering your relationships? And alongside that, always a plug to consider seeking professional help in order to deal with the heavy emotions that are associated with guilt.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Those were all great suggestions. I think guilt is an emotion that you really have to tease out. So I love that you recommended therapy. I think there can be other emotions around that too. Maybe anger because you feel responsible for your mom, sadness because you feel like you're in this role of needing to take care of her. And another thing I was thinking about is maybe your mom likes that lifestyle. We have our introverts in our life that really are homebodies and like to be home and don't like to go anywhere. So maybe that's part of it too for your mother. Maybe for you though, you're noticing you want to move in a new direction in life and be more social and extroverted, and your activities look different. Maybe your mom does like to stay home. So I think respecting and knowing what the life she wants to live is also part of that, maybe. Great.
Thank you, Kadence and Katy. This is another question we got, which I would love answers to. How can I navigate setting boundaries when I fear repercussions from my family? So how can I navigate setting boundaries when I fear repercussions from my family?
Can I jump in?
Mm-hmm.
I think when I think about that, that's an emotion, right? I fear setting boundaries with my family, and we can work with our emotions. We can work with that fear that comes up. So that's the first thing that comes to mind, is to recognize that emotion, to regulate it, to know what it's there for, and to know that it's okay to feel that way, but it doesn't have to control your boundaries and doing what's best for you.
Definitely. I definitely agree with that, Katy. I also, and alongside that, like kind of piggybacking off of it, I think it's helpful to reframe our orientation of boundaries. They're not a way to say, don't love me, here are my cones, don't go here. They're actually a way for us to gain the freedom to love and be loved. And we can't engage in intimate or vulnerable moments or relationships if we're constantly on guard or in protection mode. So these boundaries can help us teach people how to love us better. However, I am also hearing like this fear of repercussions and like these consequences, repercussions, and especially when we're talking about dysfunctional family dynamics, that can become very unsafe. So ideally you set in a safe environment, you'd set the boundary and you'd see if the other person's willing to change or compromise or respond to the boundary. But in context of high toxicity or abuse, it can at times escalate the dysfunctional or abusive dynamics. So there's kind of two approaches you can take. You can try and be really calm, direct, neutral, and call out the behavior every time it happens immediately when it's happening in the moment and directly tell them to stop. And if that doesn't work, if they don't stop the behavior, removing yourself as best you can and as best you are able, as it's safe for you to do so. And doing this every time that the behavior occurs, like, so that consistency will show that you're very serious about the boundary. However, or you could take an alternative approach, especially if things are particularly unsafe for you. Boundaries can be made and used to keep yourself safe rather than change someone else's actions. So consider the behaviors that violate your boundary or violate your safety. And when these safety violations occur, take action and place a barrier between you and potential harm. If your safety is at risk, these boundaries don't need to be communicated to others. These can be self-boundaries, like when I'm yelled at and feel unsafe, I leave the room. That's something that you enforce for yourself. Those are self-protective boundaries. And as always, if a situation becomes unsafe, stop and prioritize your safety. You can do this by calling a hotline, speaking to a counselor for support, contacting 911 or other emergency services if you're in danger. You can also do this by utilizing your support networks, considering your ability and willingness to go no contact, and creating a safety plan and putting it into action when you're able to.
Thank you. Thank you both. We have another question here in the chat, and then we'll go back to the other ones. But I just want to get to this, and we have 5 minutes. Katy and Kadence, do you guys have more time if we run over a little bit?
We'll be fine to stay. I will, at least.
Yeah.
Okay. And anyone who's in the chat, this would have ended at 8:30, but we'll run over a little bit because we do have some great questions that we'll get to. The one in the chat is, how do we encourage all the wonderful interventions and boundaries while honoring cultural variables, values, and traditions? I love family systems theory and have benefited greatly personally and professionally from it, but I found it challenging to see it from a collectivist angle and to work from that angle clinically.
That's a great question. Do you want to go, Kate, or?
I'd be happy to jump in if you don't have any initial thoughts yet, or can I?
Go for it.
All right. This is really an incredible question. And it really comes down to like communication and how, number one, how safe that communication is, but also the means of communication, right? So maybe with our parents, they might feel like we're being disrespectful if we ask them to adhere to a boundary. They might feel as though autonomy is like a big no-no. And I know that's something that happens within my own personal family system is I'll try to set a boundary and it's like, who are you, little girl? And that happens because of our own cultural context. But some of the ways that we can modify communication could include relating it back to the person that you're trying to set the boundary with a lot more specifically. So say you want to set a boundary with your mom that she doesn't yell at your son when he changes the remote, changes the TV all the time. Please don't yell at my son, right? You could say, Mom, don't yell at my son, don't do that. Or you could say, Mom, how would you feel if you were just enjoying yourself and someone started screaming at you? She might say, I wouldn't like that. So in this non-confrontational way, in this way of bringing in empathy and rebuilding in empathy, we can bring other folks in who might have grew up with other types of dynamics where it was totally acceptable to yell at children all the time. So that's my initial thoughts. Katy, do you have anything to add?
No, that's great. I think highlighting the cultural variables, values, and traditions around the holidays is really important. And if we're thinking about it from a clinical lens, I do think it's important to highlight that our positionality really plays into how we implement boundaries and interventions with our clients. And so we need to be mindful of that and practice in a culturally competent way. And so, a boundary that maybe for me as like a white woman might look different from somebody who is coming from a different culture or tradition. And so I think it really goes going down to what Kadence said first, communication, to like really know your client, their culture, and you will never be able to be fully versed in somebody else's experience or life. But those open dialogues to know if your client needs to be pushed a little bit, and knowing that they're not wanting to set those boundaries because of fear of abandonment or rejection, or maybe it is a cultural issue, it's a value issue, it's a tradition issue. So I think there needs to be a lot more sensitivity in that area, and a lot more conversation and communication around what culture, traditions, and values look like for that person, and how they still hold those values, and what they want, because it often might look different than my lens as a white therapist.
Thank you. Another question we have is, I feel that I'm constantly targeted by my family. How do I deal with this?
Oh, that's a good one.
I guess they're talking about, maybe specifically during the holiday season, or I don't know. I feel that I'm constantly targeted by my family. How do I deal with this?
Yes. So one of the tools that I would recommend is it's called the gray rock method. So this is a method that's pretty commonly used by those who are at the time unable to leave a situation of narcissistic abuse. So this involves like communicating in a really uninteresting way when interacting with people abusing or manipulating you. It's all about unresponsiveness, like keeping an interaction with the person or people really brief, avoiding them if possible, giving shorter one-word answers. And it's a practice that's different from emotional withdrawal, in that this is an intentional method when done on purpose, with a purpose, and only around the specific individual who is causing you harm. This isn't the method for everybody. And it's important to note there's not too much clinical research on this method, and it does have its potential risks. So it's a short-term rather than a long-term solution for folks, rather than a long-term solution for folks dealing with these dynamics. But it is a method that can be leaned on to separate oneself. Practicing detachment in those moments and enforcing your boundaries are also extremely, extremely important. Either coming into your body and being extremely mindful, or stepping out a bit and saying, I'm not going to give XYZ reaction because I don't want them to have that control over my emotional reactions. Those are some framing things that could be helpful in these situations.
Yeah, I think that was great, Kate. I think we've highlighted that a lot in this presentation, that you are responsible for your emotions and your reactions. And I think that can happen a lot in family dynamics, where maybe two siblings gang up on another sibling when you're back home, or one sibling and a parent gangs up, and you do feel like you're targeted. It's, in clinical terms, it's called triangulation, and it's kind of like this triangle dynamic, and you're caught in it, and it can be really stressful, and a lot of emotions come up. So just going back to what we've been saying, you're responsible for your emotions. So having those coping skills to take a step back, take some breaths, go to the bathroom, or use a phrase that sets your boundary in that moment. I'm feeling really hurt right now. Express yourself if you feel like it's safe to do so.
Thank you. What wonderful tips you guys are offering. I mean, this is really an incredible session. We have one more question that was submitted in advance of this presentation that I'll get to. If anyone has any questions that you want to share before we log off, please share it. And you can also email Katy or Kadence individually. You can email me, whatever you feel most comfortable with. And one more note before I read the last question, I will be sharing this recorded presentation with everyone. Hopefully at some point tomorrow, latest Monday. I just have to probably edit it a little bit. And I will also at that point be sharing the information on the group therapy that Katy and Kadence will be hosting on this exact topic, hopefully starting in January. So stay tuned for the flyer and URL where you can sign up for that shortly. And yeah. And the video for this will actually also be on our website, so you can share with friends and family who you feel would greatly benefit. So our last question here is, how do I deal with dysfunctional family dynamics when I'm still living at home?
Great question. And a really difficult one, especially when living at home can often feel almost unescapable. Do you mind if I jump in first, Katy?
Go for it.
Great. Some recommendations, starting with boundaries once again. Setting boundaries are and can be really important. But when we're living at home, and in some families, verbalized boundaries may still be violated or worse, used against you. And so I would invite you to keep track of your own boundaries, create self-protective boundaries, and keep your word to yourself as best you can and as best you're able and safe to do so, and enforcing them as best you're able. And if your boundaries are violated, change the subject, remove yourself from the conversation. Anything you can do to create more spaces of safety for yourself is a number one key. Alongside that would also be limiting the information that you share with them that could potentially be used against you. This allows you to remain protected if they don't have so much information, if you know that it's going to be weaponized. Make use of some of that participant observation that we discussed earlier in the presentation. And again, self-compassion. If you were a child in an environment where dysfunction is present and you're hurting as an adult, that's not your fault. It's okay to validate your emotional pain for yourself. Just try and give yourself kindness in the process of feeling your emotions.
That's great. Yeah, something else comes to mind. I think it's important to make sure you're doing what's best for your safety. So evaluating your situation of living at home. And I think creating a lot of structure would be really helpful as well. Knowing what you're doing Monday through Sunday, and also having control of your time that is spent with your family, and how much you allow them into your personal space. So kind of going back to boundaries for sure.
And seek counseling if you're able. It always helps. It's a lot easier when you have a safe space to be able to talk about the things that are happening, especially when so many dysfunctional family dynamics are shrouded in secrecy and a need to keep everything close and protect the family, often for many of us. So seek counseling if you're able.
Thank you, Kadence. Thank you, Katy. This was such a wonderful session. And it's a testament because it went overtime, which is pretty amazing. We will share the recording with everyone. Again, if anyone has specific questions, please feel free to email Katy and Kadence directly. Kadence, is there another slide with your email? Yep, there we go.
Sorry about this. Yeah.
You guys can email them directly. Feel free to check out our website. You can read some more blogs by Katy on there, which are incredible. And I'm sure we'll find a blog soon from Kadence. And please stay tuned for more information on the group that will be starting. Again, thank you, everyone. And we hope that everyone is able to take this information and have the best holiday season that they can have, even if it's being alone.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Happy holidays.
Thank you.